Okay, thank you, Jolie, for that. Uh, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Asan Jamal, and I'll cover the introduction part of this particular session with respect to project risk management. This webinar is based on the Project Risk Management Practices Standard, which is issued by Project Management Institute USA in 2009. And this practice standard is, consistent with the project management body of knowledge for managing projects and by applying the project risk management practice. So organizations can minimize the negative impact of threats and maximize the positive impact of opportunities in project by using these guidelines. Now, next please. So in this webinar, we'll cover the basic definition, scope, the concept of project risk management, particularly the risk definition and why project risk management is essential for the project companies. Um, in the later part of this presentation, I'll cover the management processes, the project risk management processes that includes the planning, risk management, identifying, prioritizing risk before they occur, and one of the important essential element is to quantify the risk, and it is covered in the quantitative risk analysis to estimate overall project risk, how project managers can quantify these risks in different areas and responding to identified high priority risks. Also, in this particular area, in the project management process, the monitoring and control is one of the essential part which project managers usually follow in order to manage the risk. So this is broadly the course content which we'll cover in the today's webinar. Now moving to the next slide. Uh, First, we start with the definition of project because it is very important that we should understand what is actually project and some of the basic concepts which are related to the project definition. Next, please. So as per the standard definition of project, the project has four important key components in the definition. The one is the project always be a temporary. Uh, Temporary does not mean it's a short in duration, but it means that every project has a definite beginning and ending phase. The second important component of the project is to clearly defined objective. Obviously, when you start the project, before starting, there must be some sort of objective setting. And the project scope is to cover and achieve those objectives. So the clear defined objective is the second component of the definition. And the project has obviously beginning and end, and it involves resources to achieve project objectives. So the project definition covers the four component. One is temporary. It should have a defined objective. It has a beginning, a definite beginning and ending phase, and there must be some resources involved. Resources in terms of manpower, resources in terms of plant or machinery, resources in terms of cost or money involved, investment sort of thing. So it all involves the resources in the definition of project. Next slide, please. So projects are everywhere in our daily life or even in our industry as well. Like if you are going to build a plant and any infrastructure project, developing or buying a new enterprise resource planning system is definitely a project. And in any company, if there is a new product development department and they are developing and researching new sort of products, so innovative products to the market. So this is also called a project. So there are different variations in different industries for the project. Next, please. So this is a very typical project life cycle. It's a graph which are usually used by project managers, and we usually taught these concepts, project life cycle concepts in different industries and academic. So if you can see the graph very closely, there are two axes. One is x-axis and the one is another one is y-axis. The x-axis represents the time or project duration. However, the y-axis represents level of efforts required in different project stages. So technically, there are four project stages in the whole overall project life cycle. If you can see, starting from the defining stage, which we also called it design phase, the planning one, executing, and the last one is closing. So there are four typical project stages in the project life cycle. Next, please. And in this slide, you can see the project management triangle. It's a very basic concept, managing how to manage the project risk. So this is a model showing different constraints in the project management. As per this project constraints model, you can see the quality of any project work is constrained by project budget, the deadlines, that is timing, and the scope. And the project manager can trade between these constraints. So there are three important areas which are called the project trade-offs: the scope, time, and budget. So changes in one constraint compel changes in other constraints to compensate, or quality will suffer. For example, uh, a project can be completed faster by increasing a budget or cutting the project scope. So this equation, there are three different equations of trade-off. One, if we want to increase the scope, you have to increase the time and cost as well. Uh, if you have a very limited time, you need to reduce the timing. So you should increase the cost and reduce the scope as well. In the third equation, if you want to reduce the budget, so exactly you have to increase the time and reduce the scope. So these trade-offs are called project management constraints. Next, please. So let's do a small project reality check and see how different project stakeholders perceive project differently. And this reality check will prove why risk management practices is important in the overall project lifecycle. So let's see how this project reality check works. Next, please. So in this picture, this is the client's project expectation. If we start starting a new project and what the client wants, so this is what clients actually perceive from the project outcome. This is called client's project expectation. Okay. If we go to the next slide, uh, where architects involved, so architects saw it differently. So this is what an architect perceived in order to achieve this objective. So as per the architect's design, this project should be uh, done as per the picture shown in the slide. And if we go to the next slide, uh, if we involve the engineers who designed this particular project, so this is what engineers design. Of course, you'll see more comfort, but it's less safety. Okay. And if we go to the next slide, the builder's perspective, how builders built it actually. And finally, what the contractor built for the client is to save time, minimum budget, but least scope of work. So that's why we need to consider project risk management in every type of project, because there are different variations, different scope of perception by different stakeholders in the project. So, and in order to manage the expectations of client, the outcome of the project, you need a project risk management cycle in the project management concept. So, next slide, please. Now, we are moving to the project risk management practice standard. And in the coming slides, we'll discuss the scope, objective, and the processes of risk management in more detail. So you can learn what project risk management standards are with respect to managing the risk. Uh, if we go to the next slide, uh, we'll see the purpose of Project Management Institute Project Risk Management Practice Standard, why it is designed and why it is important for the project managers. So there are three key purposes. One is to provide a standard for project management professionals to adopt a good practice in managing project risk. The second most important purpose is to develop a common standard which is globally acceptable in every region in the world. And the last one is to apply both large and small projects of any type. So this practice standard, which was developed by Project Management Institute, can be implemented on every type of project, either on every size of the project. Either it's a large infrastructure project or a small house building sort of project. So it can be implemented in different sizes of the project easily. Next slide, please. Now, in this slide, this is a hierarchy of PMI project risk management resources to be used by project management professionals while managing project risk. And if you can see the diagram, uh, there are three different levels of standards which are referred by the project managers in order to managing their project risk. Number one, the first one comes from the specific project risk management principles, which are given in the practice standard, which we are just discussing right now. There are detailed processes which are explained in the PMI PAMBOK guideline, and we will cover this in the slides in the next slides as well. And the last one is the theory, tools, and techniques, which are available in different handbooks and related courses. So these three important areas can provide a strong guidance and sort of a standard for the project managers so that they can effectively manage their project risk as per the international guidelines and standards. So these are available in all sort of standards, books, and practices. Now, if you see the second slide, which is again the project risk management practice standard, there are three main sections of the document. Uh, the first document, the first part of the document is the introduction part, where you'll find a framework, purpose, and scope, which we already covered in the previous slide. And the second part of this document is on the project risk management processes. So these are the similar type of processes which we usually see in the standard risk management process cycle. Like there are certain steps to follow in order to implement the project risk management process. Like you have to plan the risk management philosophy, identify the risk, analyze the risk qualitatively and quantitatively, prepare the risk responses, and monitor and control. So this is one of the essential part of this document, which covers the whole project risk management process. And in the last part of this document, there is a glossary of terms, tools, and templates for the reference purpose, so that you can easily refer the templates, especially the templates related to the risk registers, analysis techniques, and some definitions and terminologies for your understanding. So primarily, this project management practice standard is divided into these three sections. Now, coming to the next slide, we have for project risk management success, there are six general critical success factors. We call it in the short form CSF. So if you can see, I'll just go through in a brief detail about this CSF. And the first one is recognize the value of risk management, because project risk management should be recognized as a valuable discipline, and it provides a positive potential return on investment to project stakeholders. And second critical factor is to individually commitment and responsibility. Individuals' commitment and responsibility, because project participants, stakeholders should accept the responsibility for undertaking risk-related activities, because they have to engage from the inception of the project risk management cycle. And the risk management is everybody's responsibility. That's the key message in this particular standard. Third, CSF is on open and honest communication. Yes, everyone should be involved in the project risk management process. It's teamwork, and the project team should provide their input for effective decision making in order to make this project risk management more effective and managing your risk efficiently. Uh, Next one is organizational commitment. Obviously, organizational commitment can only be established if risk management is aligned with the organization's goal and objective. So it should be related to the organization's overall goal and objective. And the project risk management may require a high level of managerial support. So the top level involvement is essential for effective project risk management. Uh, and next is the risk effort scale to project, because project risk management activities, whatever activities you are doing in the managing your project risk, it should be consistent with the value of the project to the organization and its level of project risk as well. In particular, the cost of a project risk management, it should be appropriate to its potential value, and it should be potential value to the project and the organization. And the last critical success factor is integration with management, with project management, because project risk management does not work in silos or in a separate way from other project management processes. So it means successful project risk management requires correct execution of the other project management processes. So by applying these critical success factors, you can make your project risk management more effective and more robust than any other standard. Now, next slide, please. So we'll now move to the principles and concept of project risk management, which is another important area because every project manager should understand the basic concepts of project risk or the definition of risk. So in the next slide, please. If, in the next slide, you need to understand the definition of risk. The word risk is used in many ways, in our everyday language and in various special disciplines, even in the industries, in the business, we use the word risk. And as per the PMBOK fifth edition of PMI, so the project risk defines as is uncertain event or condition that if it occurs has a positive or a negative effect on project objective. So it means any event which is uncertain, you cannot predict the occurrence of that event, and its consequence would be positive or negative on the effects of the project objective. So it could be either negative or positive. So the definition includes two key dimensions of risk, if you can see. The first one is uncertainty, which is like the probability or the likelihood of occurrence of that event. And the second important component is its effect on a project objective, either in a positive way or a negative way. So when assessing the importance of a project risk, these two important dimensions must be considered simultaneously. Like the insurance professional, the insurers usually analyze the risk with respect to the frequency and severity simultaneously, exactly in the same way in the project risk cycle. If you are going to analyze the project risk, so you have to consider again these two components simultaneously. So the uncertainty dimension may be described using the word probability and likelihood, as I mentioned earlier, and the effect may be called as impact or consequence. Impact or consequence may be positive or negative to the project objective, either way. So the definition of project risk also covers uncertain events, uh, which could have either negative or positive effects on project objective, as I mentioned earlier. And these are also called opportunities or threats. Okay, so the either you can just write a negative or positive effect, or you can write it opportunities or threats, which are important to address in project risk management process. So next slide, please. So the second concept which need to understand in the project risk management cycle is to distinguish risk from risk related with features such as cause and effect. Okay, so the cause risk effect chain can be used in a risk statement and it properly described in project risk management process. So causes are events or circumstances which might be exist or can be exist in the future with respect to the environmental changes or certain changes in the project life cycle, and that will give rise to risk like threat to project objective. And the effects again is a conditional future events or conditions which would directly affect one or more project objective. Okay, so if the associated risk occurs, so impact on project objective can be positive or negative, as we learned in the previous slide. So if you can see in the second slide, the next slide, uh, there's a cause risk effect example. Okay, so the cause risk effect example is like is a chain effect. In this is one of the example which I just mentioned here about the IT data security project. So there's a objective of the project. It could be implementation or development of a IT data security system. It's sort of a project, and there might be some sort of event which can be triggered by a cause, any event which might threaten the objective of the project, and if the event occurs, there might be some effect, and some effect will definitely have positive or negative impact. So like for example, the cost might be if we don't encrypt our digital assets. So if because of this failure, data breach, and then once the data was breached, then we may not protect the public's personal data. So that's why this is one of the classic example of cause and effect. You need to understand the causations of the event and the consequential effects of the events, so that you can understand how the project uh, can be not achieved, can be have some failures. So you need to understand the cost risk effect example is one of the important principle in the project risk analysis. Now, in the next slide, we'll cover the basic concept and definition of project risk. Is now we'll see what is project risk management. So, project risk management aims to identify and prioritize risk in advance, and it gives you some sort of actions so that you can protect your stakeholders' objective as well. So, the project risk management is not an optional activity; it is an integral part of every aspect of managing the project and regarding any phase of the project life cycle. Like we just seen in one of the previous slide, there are four stages of project life cycle. So the project risk management should be implemented or integrated in all the project life cycle stages. Now, in the next slide, uh, this is another one of the important concept. Like, yeah, next slide, please. Uh, the next one. I'll just skip here. Okay, next slide. So yes, thank you. No, not the graph one, the previous one. Yeah, thank you. So this is one of the important concept in the to understand the risk event graph. So this is a graph model of risk management challenge in any project. Like again, there are two axes. One axis, the x-axis of the graph is project life cycle, and the y-axis is the degree of risk during different project life cycle. So if you can see the first curve, which means the chances of a risk event occurring, example, an error in time estimates, cost estimates, or design technology. These are highest or greatest in the concept, planning, and startup phases of the project. So you can see the first graph is on the higher side of risk in the initial phases of the project, like the planning phase, the startup phases. And if we refer to the second curve, the cost impact of a risk event in the project is less if the event occurs earlier rather than later. So it means in the early stages of the project period, if you can, in the early stages of the project period, there is an opportunity for minimizing the impact of potential risk. On the contrary, as the project passes halfway implementation mark, so the cost of a risk event occurring increases rapidly. For example, the risk event of a design flaw, if we are designing anything and there's a design flaw occurring after a prototype has been made, has a greater cost or time impact than if the event occurred in the startup phases of the project. So the conclusion here is in this particular graph is to identify the project risk events in the early stages of the project cycle, and deciding a response before the project begins is a more prudent approach. So that's why this graph is very important to understand the significance of identifying and implementing the responses of risk in the early phases of the project rather than at a later stages of the project, which would incur more cost and more time to the project company. So next slide, please. So now we are now covering the project risk management process and planning in detail here. So we'll see how project risk management processes are outlined and how these are sequenced in a manner. So next slide. So project risk management describe a structured approach for understanding and managing risk on a project. Like it is very essential that at the start of the project risk management process, you need to clearly define the objective. It is also clear that different projects are exposed to different level of risk. It means there are different nature of risk available or exposed to the project. So each step in this project risk management process should be scalable to meet the different levels of risk, and scalable elements are mentioned like available resources, how methodology and processes should be followed, what type of tools and techniques can be used to identify and the model the risk. There are supporting infrastructure available so that you can mitigate those risks and review and update the frequency and reporting the requirements to the top management. So these are some of the key important steps, in this project risk management process. And another important thing is that in order to understand different level of risk management application, there are three main actions that needs to be provided in order to tailor your requirements. Like number one is define your objectives first and identify the risk which can threaten those objectives. That is called risk identification exercise. And second important step is define how the elements of project risk management process will be scaled for this project. You need to identify the level of resources required. You need to identify the methodologies. You need to identify the tools and techniques required to analyze your risk. So these are one of the second key objective here in the project risk management process. And the last one is how you need to define the risk thresholds, the tolerances, and the assessment framework. So these are covered in the later part of the slides. So I will cover it in the next slide as well. So next slide, please. So this diagram is very important for you to understand the summarized version of project risk management process. So as you can see, there are different steps involved, like I just mentioned earlier. So the key steps are in this particular project risk management process is starting from plan risk management. You have to plan, like means like you have to define the scope and objective of the project risk management process and ensure that the risk process is fully integrated into wider project management. Okay. You need to identify the risk. Identification means you need to know the risk which are practical and which are exposed to the different cycles of the project. You need to perform qualitative risk analysis, like evaluating key characteristics of individual risk, enabling them to be prioritized for further action. You need to perform quantitative risk analysis, means you need to evaluate the combined effect of risk on the overall project outcome. You need to plan the risk responses, the mitigation activities, like determine how appropriate responses and strategies are, what actions should be taken to minimize or mitigate those risks. So this is one of the important element which is called risk treatment. And the last one is to monitor and control the risk, because it means you need to implement review changes in project risk exposure, identify additional risk management actions as required, and if need be, you need to assess the effectiveness of the project risk management process. So overall, you need to have a feedback process, like whatever steps you have followed, whatever actions you have taken in managing those risks, you need to get the feedback so that how effective these steps were or how effective the strategies were. So this is one of the summarized version of project risk management processes. Now, we'll see briefly about the different, definitions or, the details of the steps which are mentioned in this project risk management process. So next slide, please. Okay, so the project risk management process, it starts from planning risk management. Okay. So the planning risk management purpose is to, the objective of this planning risk management process to develop the overall risk management strategy for the project. You need to decide how the risk management processes will be executed and integrate project risk management with all other project management activities, because effective risk management requires creation of a risk management plan, an effective risk management plan, and this plan describes how the risk management process should be carried out and how they fit in with the other project management processes. So this is one of the essential first step of project risk management process. Next slide, please. So uh, in the plan risk management process, there are certain critical success factors. And the principal criteria for a valid risk management plan is to accept the stakeholders, alignment with the internal and external constraints on the project. You need to balance between cost or effort and benefit, and the completeness with respect to the needs of the project risk management process. So these critical success factors for the planned risk management process are: number one is to identify and address barriers to successful project risk management, which means the risk management plan will not deliver if the values deliver its values unless project risk management is carried out as an integral part of the project. So it should be very clear that your project risk management process should be an integral part of your project. And the corresponding activities should be built into the project work breakdown structure, and it should be included in the corresponding schedule, either it's a schedule or budget and work assignments documents anywhere. And the second important critical factor is to involve your project stakeholders in the project risk management cycle. That is one of the important element, because the project manager needs to involve the project stakeholders in the planned project risk management activities. You need to engage all your stakeholders in order to build on their skills and experience, as well as to ensure their understanding, their commitment to the full project risk management process. So, stakeholders in engagement or involvement in the initial planning phase is one of the essential part of effective risk management. And the last purpose of this critical success factor is to comply with the organization's objective, policy, and practices. The risk management plan should identify, and it should take account the relevant organizational procedures and any other enterprise environmental factors that apply, such as a strategic risk management or corporate governance processes. You need to align your project risk management plan with the organization's overall objectives and procedures. That is another important critical success factor for the plan risk management. So, next slide, please. So, there are certain tools and techniques available for developing the planning of the risk management process. And planning sessions, there are two important tools. One is the planning session, and the second was the template, which are available in the standard. So if you can see the planning sessions, so it means that planning sessions are recommended in order to build a common understanding of the project risk approach. You need to engage all the stakeholders. You need to develop a planning strategy, how to tackle different type of project risk once identified, and you need to develop some project stakeholders and gain agreement on the techniques to be used for managing risk. So this is one of the planning cycle of the risk management process. And at this point, in this initial risk responsibilities, methodologies, templates, and the terms or the definitions and other tools and techniques should be assigned and accepted by all the project stakeholders in this particular planning session. The second important element is the templates. The templates, like there are certain risk management planning templates available for work products such as risk status report. There are risk breakdown structures and the risk register as well. So you can see these type of templates at the end of this particular standard, the PMI project risk management standard, and you'll find these type of templates available for the guidance purpose only. So next slide, please. Now, coming to the important part of this project management process, which is called the project risk identification. And this is one of the important elements. If you want to identify the risk, you need to understand the different concepts available in the risk identification. So in the next slide, we'll cover how risk identification techniques should be done in the project. So next slide, please. So the project risk identification is a three-step process. There are certain inputs you need to incorporate, and there are certain tools and techniques you need to select. And after the selection process, the tools and techniques, all the data which are actually gathered or collated from the different sources or documents, you need to use these inputs in the tools and techniques, and finally you'll get the output. And the output of this risk identification is the key document which is called risk register. So this is a three-step process. Okay. So let's see how these steps should be followed. Next slide. Okay. So these are some of the identifying risk inputs. These are the documents, where you can gather or you can extract the information or the data for the risk identification exercise. Like starting from there are certain documents available, like we discussed about the risk management plan. There are cost management plan as well, schedule plans, quality documents, HR management plan. So these are some of the sources of documents or sources of data which you can gather from these type of documents, and you can use these data or information as an input for your risk identification exercise. Once all the data, all the relevant information has been gathered, then you move to the next step. Uh, Next slide, please. So the second step is risk should be identified by using the tools and techniques. There are certain identification risk techniques like documentation reviews is a very simple step, information gathering, checklist analysis, assumption analysis, diagramming, SWOT analysis, and expert judgment. So these are the tools and techniques which are available in the project risk management standard guidelines, so that a project manager can use any of these type of risk techniques in order to identify the risk process. Okay. Now, in the next slide, we'll see different type of techniques. Like one of the common technique is risk breakdown structure, which are usually used in the construction projects, where the project can be break down into different sections and subsections, different tasks or different subtasks, so that you can have a wider picture of different sort of activities required in order to achieve the project. And these activities or the processes or the breakdown structure, work structure, can also give you some idea about different inherent risk available in different type of activities. So you can first understand the breakdown structure and then identify the risk inherent in those structures. So this is one of the risk identification techniques used by construction engineers or construction managers in the project risk management process. Uh, in the next slide, you can see another technique which is called diagramming technique. So these are a bit complex, but usually these type of diagramming techniques are used by engineering designing phases, like more design or sophisticated and complex engineering design projects. So there are certain techniques like cause and effect diagram, Ishikawa or fishbone diagram, and flowcharts. So these techniques are also used by the project managers while doing risk identification exercise in the project. So next slide, please. Another important risk identification technique is SWOT analysis. SWOT means strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. And strength and weaknesses are organizations and project internal factors, and opportunities and threats are organizations or project external factors, which can influence the project objectives or the organization's overall objectives. So this is one of the theoretical or subjective sort of analysis technique where you can find what strengths do you have in the project team, and what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses as well internal, and what opportunities and threats are available for the project, so that you need to identify these in the early phases of the project. So this technique is commonly used by high level executives in the workshop, so that they can identify their project risk. Next slide, please. And the final outcome, either you are using a diagramming technique, checklist, flowchart, anything like that. So the final output of risk identification is your risk register. It's called project risk register. Okay. and where the project risk register outline all the list of risk which you have identified in the tools, their causation, the loss causation, their root causes, their categorization as well, and your responses as well. So you need to identify these first risk, and you need to elaborate and expand your risk register with respect to the root causes, category, and mitigation plan. If you can see in the next slide, there's a template. Next slide, please. Yes. Uh, this is a typical project risk register. It's simple. It's just a simple table. Starting from the column one, there's a category. Category means the risk category. Either it's a commercial risk or any technical or design risk. The second column is the risk definition. What exactly the risk is, and what are the assumptions you need to understand of the causations of the risk, and you finally prioritize those risks based on different analysis technique, which you'll see in the next slide. And the mitigation plans, you need to outline the mitigation plans as well. Okay. Now, if you want, and the final part is the ownership, the risk ownership, which is very essential for the project risk register. You need to identify the department or any responsible person who is responsible to manage or the treat the risk. So that's why ownership is one of the important component in the risk register. So next slide. So in order to identify the risk, once you have identified it, there are certain steps which like you need to analyze as well. यानी कि means risk analysis should be done either qualitatively or quantitatively. We first look at the qualitative risk analysis techniques which are available, and later on we'll see the quantitative part as well. So risk qualitative analysis is one of the essential exercise you need to for risk prioritization. Once you did this qualitative risk analysis, you finally have an idea about the prioritization of risk, which risks are more prone or more dangerous to the project objective, or which risks are medium ones, or which risks are the low category ones. So we'll see the qualitative risk analysis techniques are in the next slide. Next slide, please. So as you can see in the slide, there are certain, qualitative risk analysis techniques available and recommended in the project risk management guideline. And these guidelines, obviously, this qualitative risk analysis process will assess and evaluate the characteristics of individually identified project risk, and it should also prioritize risk based on agreed upon characteristics, nature of the risk as well. You need to assess individual risk using qualitative risk analysis for and evaluate the probability that each risk will occur and the effect of each individual risk on the project objective. So these are all subjective ones, not based on the data analysis or the fact or the scientific method. So these are subjective risk analysis technique. That's why it's called qualitative. So there are different techniques available and recommended in the project risk management standard, like the risk probability and impact assessment, probability impact matrix, risk data quality assessment, risk categorization, expert judgment is there. So these are some of the techniques which are recommended in the project risk management guideline. So we'll see one of the risk qualitative risk analysis technique in the later part of the slide. Next slide, please. So, risk probability and impact assessment is basically comprises of two components. One is the probability of occurrence of risk, and the second one is the impact. It means that once the risk occurred, then what consequences or what type of impact should be on the project objective. Either it could be on the schedule, it could be on the cost or the quality or performance of the project. So this is called risk probability and impact assessment. Next slide. Uh, in order to start the probability and impact assessment, you need to define the rating scales and the definitions, like for the probability and the impact. Like if you're seeing in this slide, there's a table of a rating and a scale with the definitions of likelihood. Like there are very unlikely, likely, possible, or very unlikely. So these are some of the important aspect of the definition. And you also need to identify the impact as well. Like impact means like it should be insignificant, it should be low, it should be medium, or it should be high. So it all depends upon the definition as well, and along with the scale as well. You can see there are scales available like 1 to 5 and 1 to 5 on the probability side, and the 1 to 5 on the impact side. So higher the scale, higher the impact, or higher the definition, the more important the definition is, the more risky the situation is. So next slide, please. Uh, and once you identified the risk, which we already discussed in the risk register slide, so this is one of the extract of the table, risk register table, where you can find the category, the risk definition, the likelihood and impact, and the priority. So there are, if the risk have more likelihood and more impact rating scale, then it is more, it's on high priority risk. And if there is a risk which has less likelihood and less impact scale, so it means that it should be in the definition of medium or low priority. So this is all about the quantification. So it means you need to, one of the rating scales, you need to identify the ratings, and based on the likelihood and impact, you need to prioritize the risk based on either it could be high, medium, and low. Okay, next slide, please. And this is one of the matrix which you can see. This is the final result of the probability and impact matrix, where you can find there are different color codings like blue, green, yellow, and red. Red means that high probability and high impact risk, which means that this is more dangerous to the project risk, project objective. Medium means that there are strategies which should be implemented to mitigate those medium risks as well. And the low priority risks are those risks which should be done or which should be dealt in the later part of the project or in the later stages. For the project companies, the high category and the medium category risk should be addressed first, and then the lower category ones. Okay, next slide. And this is the overall result of a probability impact matrix. This is what I already explained in the previous slide. So this is one of the summarized version of the table here. Okay, next slide, please. Now, moving to the quantitative risk analysis, this is a new technique, the methodology which is recommended by this standard. So in the early stages, in the earlier side of the project management, the quantitative risk analysis are not common practice. But once the computer models developed, and there are certain computer-based modeling techniques are available, so quantitative risk analysis is one of the essential part of analyzing the risk as well. So most of the organizations usually follow both qualitative and quantitative risk analysis in order to understand the risk, project risk better. So next slide. We'll see some of the techniques which are commonly used by the project companies for analyzing the risk quantitatively. Like there are certain techniques commonly used here, like sensitivity analysis is one of the technique which determines the sensitivity of risk of likelihood and impact. Another important technique is expected monetary value technique, which is also we also call it decision tree analysis, usually done by project companies, especially for the construction projects or one of the major projects whenever they are doing, and it will determine the expected monetary value of the project. And this is again one of the sophisticated manual technique previously done, but right now there are certain sophisticated computer softwares available. So these decision tree analysis and EMV analysis are done in different softwares as well. So this type of risk analysis is done in order to determine the contingency reserve required for a project plan. And the last one is the Monte Carlo simulation. A Monte Carlo simulation is a computational algorithm that rely on repeated random sampling in order to obtain the numerical result. So these are all computer-based models. And in particularly with reference to the project risk management side, this Monte Carlo simulation are used to measure the uncertainty of project like project cost overruns and project schedules as well. So these are all scenario analysis by using the computer models. These are also available right now. There are certain Monte Carlo simulation models available in the market so that project companies can analyze their risk quantitatively by using these models. So that's all for my part of presentation. Thank you so much for joining. I think if you have any questions, if any, so please feel free to ask. You just unmute your mic and uh, also a message in the chat box as well, so that I can respond to you accordingly.
Thank you for that, Hassan. A really good presentation. I've only had one question so far, and that's, could you share the presentation with
Yeah,
the
sure.
delegates? Is that okay
Yeah,
for
sure.
me to do that? Okay.
Yeah, presentation will be available, and you can access this presentation.
Okay, so if anybody would like that information, I know we've got a message here from Fan. I will send you the presentation. If anybody else would like it, if you email branches@iirsm.org, I will arrange for that to be sent for you. If anybody else wants to ask any questions, please use the chat, the questions function now. Doesn't look like we've got any more questions. That's probably because it was such a comprehensive and interesting presentation, Hassan. So
Oh, thank you so much.
do you want to, is there anything else you want to share about the branch before we sign off for the day?
Yeah, definitely. The Pakistan branch is, more active right now. We have active members as well, and we are also planning to conduct more webinars in this coming months. I think two webinars due in this year. So and a very good topics and speakers as well. So definitely we'll let you know by our LinkedIn page or on our website as well. You'll inform the details of these webinars and their schedule as well accordingly.
Great, thank you, Hassan. There aren't any, oh, we've just had one more question. Let me just see. Just bear with me, I can't actually read
Sure.
that at the moment. Won't be a second. One question, sir, why is there no risk mitigation factor?
Well, risk mitigation factor is already there. If you can see in the risk register, this is one of the important element that whatever risk you have identified and you have prioritized the category of the risk, so the mitigation plan should be developed. And obviously, there are different categories of risk and different categories of mitigations available. So, risk mitigation plan definitely is one of the essential part of this project risk register. And I just showed you in the slide very briefly, but it should be a detailed one. There are procedural mitigation plans. There are certain, physical mitigation plans as well in order to reduce the likelihood and reduce the impact of the risk whenever it occurs. So yes, definitely it is one of the essential part of this project register.
Okay, I think this is the same question asked a different way. Why is there no risk mitigation or transfer factor in critical success factors for risk management? I think you just answered that question, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you. A couple of comments, excellent presentation. Thank you, thank you. And then there's one question here. Is there any safety related issues or risk that we should consider?
Yeah, definitely. This is one of the another category of risk which you identified in the risk register, and especially for the construction projects, we'll find so many safety breaches and safety issues and challenges on site. And obviously, safety is one of the categories of risk which should be mentioned and addressed in the risk register. And obviously, mitigation plans should be developed accordingly. So yes, you're right. Safety is one of the important challenge for the construction projects.
Great, thank you. A couple more comments saying really good presentation, great presentation, thank you. Two people have asked for the presentation, so I'll make sure that's sent to you after the webinar. And just to let everybody know, you will receive an attendance certificate. It normally comes out within 24 hours, so you probably receive it around the same time tomorrow. So I'd like to thank you, Hassan, for a really great presentation, and I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and we hope to see you at next month's webinar.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.